what we have to do is encourage the public to really be garbage aware. When you produce it, think about it, and maybe the next time we won't be producing as much.
Garbage. It is all around us, and we're running out of room to dump it. Consider, we throw away 16 billion disposable diapers a year, along with 1.6 billion pens, 2 billion razors and blades, and nearly 250,000 tires. We have lost 3,000 dumps in the past 5 years, and we're going to shut down another 2,000 by 1993. Good evening, I'm Bob Berkowitz, and this is FNN Focus. In our second half hour tonight, Libya's ambassador to the United Nations. But first, garbage, garbage everywhere, and precious little room to dump it. FNN's Bob Windsor has our report.
The evidence is everywhere. Medical debris on our beaches. That wandering garbage barge from Islip, New York that nobody wanted. The staggering volume of daily waste disposal. Are we literally being buried by our own garbage?
Well, we certainly have a trash crisis in New York City because we are fast running out of places to put all of that garbage. We produce so much of it, and we only have a limited amount of space to put it in.
New York City is a microcosm. Americans generate 160 million tons of solid waste a year, and that's growing.
Since World War II has become a throwaway society where we rely on a lot of excess packaging, we purchase an enormous amount of material, and we've been just producing so much garbage, and it's been easy to get rid of it.
We start generating garbage at birth, and as we grow and consume, we generate more. So where does it go? Most of it goes into landfills. But the landfills are filling up. We have to find alternatives.
We don't do something very quickly about all the garbage that we produce, either by recycling it or reducing a good portion of it. We're going to wind up by the year 2000 with a very, very serious and critical mess in this town.
A growing number of communities across the country require their residents to separate the types of garbage they generate. Glass, cans, and papers can be recycled. This plant in New York City recycles. The plant buys back from citizens and businesses everything from bottles and cans to plastic and paper. Once recycled, the byproduct is then sold as raw material to manufacturers.
We sell well over $1 million a year of garbage to national and international markets, bring that revenue into the South Bronx economy, the hard-pressed South Bronx economy, and we have a local economic impact that exceeds $2 million a year.
And there are more options. Incineration, high-tech burning of garbage to generate electricity without polluting the air, and reducing the inventory of trash by imposing waste disposal fees on products which cannot be recycled. But are these alternatives realistic?
Not only can we rely on those alternatives, but we must rely on those alternatives because, again, as long as we continue to dump and burn garbage like we've been doing for decades, we'll never see an end to the garbage problems that we're faced with.
Experts say even if we exercise all the options to dispose of our solid waste, more than half of it would remain. The final solution to the garbage crisis may well be to change our lifestyles and our local economies. Bob Windsor, Financial News Network, New York.
We'll be right back with public and private efforts to keep our trash and waste in check. Please stay with us. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is J. Winston Porter, Assistant Administrator for Waste Programs for the Environmental Protection Agency. And in Los Angeles, Gordon Marker, Executive Vice President, Oxford Energy System. They're a company that generates electricity by burning discarded auto tires. Let me start in Washington, if I can, with Mr. Porter. Mr. Porter, we mentioned earlier in this broadcast that we're down to 6,000 garbage site dumps across America. By 1993, we're going to lose another 2,000. Is the picture as bleak as it sounds?
It's pretty difficult. We we are going to lose a lot of landfills the next few years as things fill up. We're having a very difficult time siting or locating new facilities, and people inexorably just keep producing more garbage. We're growing at a rate of increase of garbage about twice the population growth. So we have some ideas, but things are in fact getting pretty tough.
Here in New York State, we are one of only 10 states that has a bottle recycling law. When you buy a bottle of soda or beer or whatever in your local grocery store, you pay a nickel deposit, you get it back when you return the bottle. It is surprising to me that only 9 other states have it. It seems successful here in New York. The streets look cleaner, though Lord knows they're not very clean at all. Why haven't we spread this around the country?
Well, actually, a lot of people have programs just because you're absolutely correct that only a relatively handful of states have mandatory programs, but we have about 600 curbside recycling programs in this country, and frankly, a lot of the voluntary ones have been just about as successful as the more mandatory ones. And so while I'm not, in fact, I'm actually for statewide bottle bills in general, that's not the only way to do it. And we have all over the country springing up at a pretty rapid rate a lot of voluntary or semi-voluntary or mandatory recycling programs. And I've recently called for a national goal of 25% recycling within 4 years. And I feel like we're going to meet that. It's going to be tough.
That's a commendable goal, sir, but I have to wonder, why doesn't the federal government put some more heat on the states to have these recycling programs? After all, you've done a pretty good job with the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Well, there's some that believe we should and some that believe we shouldn't. I'm not sure that there's a way we can coerce states into doing it. Frankly, the 10 states you mentioned come at it fairly different ways. And I would like to see the states move up on this problem, but I'm not sure there's any sort of top-down solution. And as I said, the voluntary programs are working, frankly, just about as well as the mandatory programs.
All right, one outfit that has reportedly been fairly successful at recycling is a company in Los Angeles, and Gordon Marker is the executive vice president of Oxford Energy. Am I correct, sir? I was told that you burn tires to create energy. Tell me about that.
Well, we burn a number of things to create energy. We're in the business of looking at various pieces of the waste stream and seeing what we can do that's creative about it to...
We can see some pictures up at our screen of your burning tires, sir.
Your burn.
Okay. There you go.
All right, that's inside our plant in Modesto, California. We burn approximately 4.5 million tires a year. We turn it cleanly into energy that goes onto the grid. We create steam. The steam goes into a turbine generator. The generator produces electricity that goes onto the grid, and it services the needs of about 15 or 17,000 households.
Well, you said cleanly, sir, and I think any of us who have ever seen tires burning know what the smell is like, which is awful, burning rubber. And we've also seen a lot of black smoke. How can you be so sure that this is clean air?
Well, it's tested. We have an air quality permit issued by the state of California that says, in effect, that if it has too much bad emissions, if it has black smoke, if it does not meet standards, the plant gets closed down. In point of fact, we have a technology that's been in operation in Germany since the early 70s. We have taken that technology, built a larger plant here in the United States to begin on a nationwide basis to deal with a very difficult disposal problem, whole tires.
Let me go back to Mr. Porter in Washington. This sounds awfully promising. Is it practical? I mean, we have 220 million tires that we throw away in this country every year.
Well, we certainly have to do something. You're right. We throw away about 1 tire per person per year. We have a few billion stacked up out there. So I think I can't speak precisely to the gentleman's process, but we do need to create energy from tires. I think that's one good way to do it. I'm convinced we can have good environmental controls on tire waste-to-energy plants, and I think it is practical. I think we can do it.
I think that that this administration and the administrations before that have got to answer a lot of questions. One is, why in this country do we only recycle 10% of our waste? In Western Europe, it's 30%. In Japan, it's 50%.
Well, I think for one reason, it's just plain old economics. Until very recently, it's been very cheap to build landfills in this country, $2 or $3 or $4 a ton. It's now $50 or $75 a ton in many places. In Europe, it's been expensive, and in Japan, very expensive for a long time, and virtually impossible to landfill waste. We landfill about 80% of our waste. That's changing very rapidly because of economics and because of just finding new locations. So I think what you're going to see, and we're beginning to see, is a lot more recycling just driven by market considerations and the fact that we cannot find new landfills.
All right, our telephone number, it's toll free, and we invite you to call. It's 1-800-283-FINN, 1-800-283-FINN. Let's take our first call from Joe from Boston. Hello, Joe.
Hi, how you doing?
Great.
This is directed towards Mr. Porter. I'd like to know why the government really hasn't put any more pressure on private industry to develop more garbage burning sites, and would that be in direct reasoning or a direct result from the Reagan administration and relaxing the environmental codes on that are regulated by the EPA?
Well, we do need more burning sites for garbage. In fact, there's about 100 garbage incinerators or waste-to-energy incinerators in the country now. About 100 more are planned as we speak. The problem has largely been one of public reaction, where the local public in many of these cases has not wanted an incinerator in their neighborhood. And of course, they don't want a landfill either. So we've worked on air pollution standards. We have very stringent standards. We're dealing with how to manage ash. I think we're getting those requirements in place. But the biggest problem, frankly, is trying to educate the public that you have to do something with garbage. It's not going to go to the moon. You've got to either recycle it or burn it or send to landfills or reduce it to the source.
All right, Dave from Missouri. I'm sorry, Dave from Missouri. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I'd just like to comment that we have here in Missouri a 10-cent deposit on reusable beverage bottles. And I understand that Dow Chemical is going to start collecting, recycling plastic containers, and that there has come up, there's been a study that shows that they can break glass and tumble it in a tumbler and use it in making roadways, and the highways will last 10 times as long.
Okay, what do you hear about that, Mr. Porter?
Well, all those are good ideas. We only recycle 1% of our plastic now. There's absolutely no reason we couldn't recycle a lot more plastic and make it into useful products, and that's beginning again to happen. Glass is eminently recyclable, either to make into new bottles or in the applications the gentleman mentions. So those are all things we're working on in the laboratories. I think economics are driving that way, and I think regulations are driving them that way.
If the idea of recycling is a good one, and I think we all agree that it is, why don't we raise the price from a nickel or a dime to 50 cents so we really make sure that every bottle gets returned?
Well, the problem with all of that, I mean, I'm not against that necessarily, but you've got to get that through legislators, and there's a lot of trade-offs in legislators about jobs and markets and whatever. One thing about these bottle bills, it's a little bit tricky, is there's a question of who do you favor? It's the glass people versus the packaging people versus the paper people versus the plastics people. They're all very concerned about how you do things to impact their market. And I don't think that's a total answer just to raise the price, because as I've said a couple of times, we're finding people are willing to return their bottles if the people in the towns will make it convenient to do that.
Mr. Marco, I don't want to forget about you. We don't have a lot of time left, but you're also trying to convert rice waste into electricity. Tell me about that.
Yes, we have a plant that is about to go into operation that will take a very large share of the Northern California rice hulls that are a byproduct of the process of milling rice. And it's it takes a lot of space in a landfill to get rid of the material. We have a plant that will grind up the rice waste, blow it into an incinerator, again, transfer that heat into steam, and power a generator.
The ultimate puffed rice. All right, gentlemen, thank you. We'll be back on more with waste in this country. Please stay with us. we're back with more from J. Winston Porter of the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, and joining us is Dr. Joseph Weissman, a specialist in environmental medicine from Los Angeles, and Stephen Kellogg, Chief Executive of a Connecticut waste management company, YWC Incorporated. Mr. Kellogg, let me start with you. You're concerned with sludge. I remember just a couple of years ago, here in New York City, hundreds, if not thousands of gallons were being, of New York City sludge, sewage, if you want to call it that, was being poured into the Hudson River every day. You could see it over on the west side of Manhattan. And that stuff was going into the river, then going into the ocean. I assume that the fish that we later ate that night for dinner was contaminated by it, and nobody seemed to get very angry about it.
It's interesting because initially in the design of municipal treatment facilities, I think the sludge aspect of it was overlooked. Consultants generally, when they did their designs, would have an arrow that said to disposal. Another technique that was utilized is just inventory the material in lagoons in a backyard, 40-acre lagoons. I think the real problem is that at the expense of environmental degradation, we've really I think we did. And in listening to the earlier trash segment, when you pay $5 to $10 per ton for disposal, you're really in a situation where you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
You know, it's pay me now, pay me later.
Yeah. Dr. Weissman, let me turn to you in Los Angeles. You believe that a lot of the diseases we suffer from today are environmentally caused. Tell me about that.
Bob, actually, if you look at today's catastrophic illnesses, and we can include cancer, heart disease, lupus, Lou Gehrig's disease, and the list goes on and on and on. The thing that they have in common is that they didn't exist before the start of the industrial age.
We had no cancer in the 19th century, 17th century?
No, cancer did exist. It's been in existence for hundreds of years, but it was an extremely rare disease. If you look at the beginning of the 19th century, about 1800, less than 1% of the population died of cancer, and that quadrupled by the time we hit 1900. And today, 1 out of 3 people are going to have cancer sometime during their lives.
And how do we know that this is environmentally caused?
Well, there's a link between the onset of the industrial age and the contamination of the environment. When you put up factories that belch smoke, or if you have waste from your factory, there are very few things that you can do with them, as we've learned tonight. You end up with garbage, and it either ends up in the water or buried somewhere, or it goes up in smoke. And it comes down eventually, and it affects our air, our land, and our drinking water.
It is also your belief that the heart attack is a, relatively speaking, new condition for man.
Oh, yes, absolutely. If you go through the medical literature, the first description of a heart attack was written in 1910, and that's relatively recently. It's true that there was some evidence of angina or chest pain that went back for about 150 years before that, but the actual description of coronary occlusion with a heart attack wasn't described until 1910 in Europe and 1912 in the United States.
Okay, now here's where it gets, I guess, a little tricky. You believe that the livestock that we eat, for meat, pork, fowl, they have been contaminated by the environment, and that, not necessarily the cholesterol and the fat, but the contamination is what has caused our heart disease.
Yes, that's exactly what I believe, because if you look at...
That flies in the face of a lot of doctors.
It flies in the face of more than just doctors. It's a general population that believes that fats and cholesterol are the major culprit. Well, fats and cholesterol are carriers of poison, and that's why they're a problem. If you go back to the ranchers in Nebraska, let's say, in the 1880s, where they ate meat 2 to 3 times a day, and lots of it. And yet there was no evidence of heart attacks whatsoever, or cancer for that matter. It's just recently that we're more aware of cholesterol and fat. And
so let me see if I've got this right now. If we ate meat that was not contaminated, we would lessen our chances of getting heart attacks?
Exactly. We not only lessen our chances...
No matter the fat content of the meat?
It doesn't make any difference whether it's the fat or the meat itself. Because today, if you're in Africa, for example, the Maasai tribe raise cattle, and they've been doing this for thousands of years. No evidence of cancer or heart attacks whatsoever. And if
But
you
the
look,
Maasai tribe, as I understand it, sir, the Maasai eat very little meat altogether. They eat mostly whole grains.
that's not true. The Maasai warriors would drink milk or the animal blood or meat. And the women and children would eat grains and vegetables, but the warriors themselves were almost practically all meat eaters.
And what about water, sir?
The water that we're drinking today contains chlorine, among other things. That's put there purposely. But of course, the aquifers are going to be contaminated by the landfills that we've been talking about. And
Mr.
so
Kellogg.
you've got to start looking in terms of drinking purified water rather than tap water.
You drink bottled water, you drink water from the tap, Mr. Kellogg?
No, I drink water from the tap, but I think it all really comes down to responsible waste management. I think we're dealing with two sets of problems. Problems created by the past, where industry may have felt they were following regulations, and they probably were, and problems created now with waste being generated now. I think the regulations are much tougher so that industry isn't in a situation where they're continuing the contamination.
Okay. Our phone lines are jammed up. Let's take some calls. Tom from Lexington, Mass. Hi, Tom. Tom, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom. You're on the air, Tom.
Actually, this is Sean Tracy. I'm a college student at Virginia Tech.
Okay.
And we're watching the show, and I had a question of Mr. Porter from the EPA.
Sure, go ahead.
And we were wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea to start a program whereby certain branches of the government are required to buy recycled paper. You could start with the EPA buying all their paper, you know, as from recycling, and you know, move on to different branches, and that would create a big demand for the paper, and it would perhaps speed up the process.
Mr. Porter?
That's an excellent point. And as a matter of fact, we're working on a new agenda and strategy for solid waste management now. We want to present to President-elect Bush before too long. And one of the things we're going to suggest to the President is an executive order by which he would direct the federal agencies to procure as many recycled materials as he can, because we can really jumpstart these markets, so to speak, by having the federal agencies procure recycled paper and glass and aluminum. And we're doing a fair amount of that. But the gentleman is absolutely right. We could do an awful lot more, and we intend to do more.
Okay, we have less than a minute left, so we're going to hold the phone calls for just a second. We have a whole bunch of them. We'll try to get to them later. Dr. Weissman, in less than a minute, is your contention that if we're going to drink bottled water, we should drink water from glass bottles and not plastic? Is that true?
That'd be preferable, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Porter, do you drink water from the tap or from a bottle?
Tap water.
Why is that, sir? Do you feel confident?
Yeah, I think we have a good water system in this country. I mean, we have used chlorine and other materials to eradicate large waterborne diseases. Certainly, we have some problems around the country, but generally, I think the water is pretty safe. I think the gentleman is missing one point. I'm not a health expert per se.
Dr. Weissman,
yes.
You're talking about?
Yes, but the big thing is people live a lot longer than they did 50 or 100 years ago, and I think that's part of the reason where people die from cancer. We see some implication of chemicals. We want to work hard on that, but I guess EPA doesn't really feel like that's the major cause of cancer.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Coming up next, chemical weapons in Libya. We'll be back in just a moment. That's FNN Focus for tonight. Tomorrow we'll plug you into the world of cable television. Please stay tuned for FNN Money Talks. Tonight, how are things working for working women and getting money for college? Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.